Greetings and salutations! I am Duwende. Today I am indulging in creepypastas, but not just any creepypasta. Creepypasta seasoned with a touch of truth. Unfortunately, I was not able to find the name of all the contributors. If you recognize the original contributors, please leave a comment and I will mention them in my following videos. If you enjoy these stories, please tap the like button below and share your appreciation with the original contributors back on the creepypasta page. Now, enjoy! "14 years before the famous Titanic sank into the North Atlantic Ocean, a man named Morgan Andrew Robertson wrote a book about a ship. The title of the book was Futility. The ship was a triple screw with very few lifeboats. But no one really worried. It was practically unsinkable. It was the largest ship ever created and could hold a capacity of 3,000 passengers and crew members. In the end, 2,500 passengers and crew boarded the ship. Then, one April night, moving at 25 knots, the ship struck an iceberg on its starboard side. It was in the North Atlantic when it sank, 400 nautical miles from Newfoundland. More than half of the passengers on board perished. There are only two differences between this fictional ship and the real Titanic. The Titanic was moving at 22.5 knots when it hit the iceberg, and it had only 2,200 passengers and crew members on board. As for the name of this fictional ship, it was called the Titan. This is a story about two young men from Birmingham, UK, and it happened in the year 1969. I'm not claiming that this is exactly how it happened, done to the last detail, but still, this is more or less a true story. Terence, a man from the working class, around the age of 20, had been interested in the cult for some time back then. He had painted his room in matte black and decorated it with inverted crosses, pentagrams, and various pictures of demons and Satan himself. He read and wrote about dark occults, the supernatural, and about everything that is evil and unholy. His mate, John, knew this well when he stumbled upon a book that was obviously written at least a couple hundreds of years ago, in Latin, went straight to Terence and gave it to him as a present. None of them had any idea what it was about, since they did not understand Latin, but it was obvious, from the appearance and the sound of some of the words written in it, that it had to have something to do with black magic or witchcraft. Terence was so amazed by this book that he forgot to ask John where he had found it. He spent the whole evening trying to figure what this book could teach him, but even after a couple of hours of intense studying, he still could not find a clue. Frustrated and exhausted, he put the book on his desk and simply went to sleep. He awakened in the middle of the night, not sure what it was that had interrupted his deep slumber, and then he saw it. On the end of his bed, barely visible in the dark of his room, stood an enormous black shape with fiery red eyes, and it pointed at him. His natural reaction was to switch on the light, which he did, and the thing was gone. As it turned out, so was the book John had given him. He looked for it everywhere in his room, in his house, at his friend's house, but the book had simply vanished. Of course, this incident had a big influence on both of them. The influence was so big, in fact, that they decided to write a song about it, and later renamed the rock band they played in after this song. The song's title was Black Sabbath, and that is how heavy metal was invented. The Daring Woods, also known as Screaming Woods, are situated in Kent, between the villages of Smarden and Pluckley. They are reputed to be the most haunted woods in Britain, and they were given their name because of the many reports of people hearing terrifying screams coming from the forest at night, or footsteps and whispers during days of fog. The forest is said to be haunted by the ghosts of the people who get lost in them. In particular, the locals mention a suicidal army colonel of the 18th century and a highwayman who was captured by the villagers, pinned to a tree and beheaded. Many from the nearby villages swear to have seen black shadows follow them while they were traveling across the forest. The woods is also famous for presenting one of the oldest Neolithic sites in the world. British physicist B. Josephson has studied the phenomenon for years during his research at Cavendish Laboratory for the Mind-Matter Unification Project, documenting everything in peer-reviewed papers, quantitative measurements of decoherence, a link between consciousness and group theoretic characterizations of hyperplanes of existence. In a recent interview, he criticized the skeptics' approach of many scientists. The trouble is that the scientific community is not aware of these results because very little of this work is published in journals like Nature and Science, and the work is often ridiculed when it is published in respectable physics journals. He cites the example of a paper on quantum mechanics by Henry Stapp of the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory that contained a reference to parapsychology. Physicists have an emotional response when they hear anything connected with parapsychology, he says. Their opinion of parapsychology research is not based on evaluation of the evidence, but on a dogmatic belief that all research in this field is false. The woodland has been the center of attention for this phenomena for many years. On the morning of November 1st, 1948, 20 people from the Maltmans area were found dead, 11 of whom were children. The bodies were forming a massive pile of human flesh, and they didn't present any wounds. Many reported seeing strange lights coming from the forest on the night of Halloween. When the massacre took place, the autopsies couldn't determine the cause of death, and after a few weeks, the local authorities quickly ended the investigation, stating that the cause was carbon monoxide poisoning. This behavior raised questions about a possible involvement of the police in the matter at the time. In 1964, private investigator Robert Collins conducted in-depth witness interviews designed to uncover hints about an alleged activity of an unknown religious cult in the village of Smarden. His research stopped after he died in a tragic car accident the following year. The Daring Wood was home for another mystery when on October 1998, on the same night of 50 years before, 4 college students who were visiting the forest went missing after people from Pluckley reported seeing figures of light similar to spider webs in the sky. Their bodies were never found, and after 3 weeks, the police investigation stopped. Every now and then, my thoughts drift towards the deaths of Leila and Raymond Howard. When that happens, a multitude of questions usually starts to plague my mind. What could have prevented their demise? Did they suffer? How many chances to save them were wasted? How many warning signs were ignored? But what really pains me to not know is, how did it all end? On Sunday, June 29th, 1997, elderly couple Leila and Raymond Howard from Salado, Texas, decided they were going to a day festival in Temple, a nearby town. It was to be a 15-mile trip, and Leila was driving. The couple departed that morning, despite earlier objections by Leila's son, who had begged to drive his mother and father himself instead. Leila declined, saying, "No, we know where to go. We go every year." Leila's son's concerns stemmed from the fact that his 83-year-old mother was showing signs of Alzheimer's disease and was often easily confused at things. At one time, Leila even meant to show up at a local Walmart for morning coffee at 10:30 a.m., but instead arrived at 10:30 p.m., perplexed at why the sun was not yet up. 88-year-old Raymond, too, was showing signs of mental deterioration due to a recent brain surgery done to combat a stroke and head injury. Leila and Raymond, though were not aware of their severe mental decline, and left for the festival that morning without even telling their other adult son, who lived just next door. The afternoon passed, and the Howards didn't return home. However, at a local Walmart in Temple, a greeter there remembered seeing Leila and Raymond coming in for coffee during the afternoon. After that, the couple's movements could not be accounted for. The several children between the two had become immensely worried for their elderly parents' safety, so they contacted the authorities, and a missing persons bulletin was posted that day, the Howards remained missing. 3 days later, on Wednesday, July 2nd, a newspaper article was published in the Austin American-Statesman about the missing couple, titled Elderly Salado Couple Missing on a Trip to Nowhere. It read, Leila and Raymond Howard are on a 4-day road trip into thin air. The Central Texas couple, in their 80s with diminishing health, somehow have turned a 15-mile journey for a cup of coffee and a party into a 500-mile-plus misadventure with no known destination. That same day, a deputy in rural Arkansas pulled over Leila for driving with her headlights off, as it was nighttime. Leila and Raymond were 500 miles away from their original starting point in Salado, Texas. The deputy later noted that Leila was polite, gentle, and acted just like my grandmother. When Leila stated that they were trying to get back to Texas, the deputy noted that they were headed in the wrong direction if they were trying to return to that state, so he gave them directions. The deputy then asked Leila where she lived, but she could not remember. The deputy let them off with only a warning. The couple were pulled over again about half an hour later for driving with their high beams on. This deputy also let them go. Neither of the deputies knew about the newspaper article, nor that the Howards were missing persons. The Howards, once again, disappeared. That next day, on Thursday, July 3rd, there was another article about the Howards. They were allegedly been spotted at a farmer's market in Arkansas, and authorities in 11 states were on the lookout for them. On Friday, July 4th, another article stated that the authorities had narrowed their search to 3 specific counties in Arkansas. There were no further developments in the search until Wednesday, July 9th, when the couple's story was covered on the CBS Morning News show. Yet another newspaper article was published about the Howards in the Austin American-Statesman, making the front page. That article's editor, Denise Gamino, stopped by the Howards' house, and the signs of the couple's mental decay were obvious. There was folded clothing still laying on the couple's bed, as if they started packing for some sort of long trip. The television was unplugged, and hearing aids were left behind in the bathroom, as well as various toiletries. Even though the month was currently July, the Howards' calendar was still on the page for February. Perhaps, most notably, the Howards' cat, Happy, was left behind, essentially abandoned. The couple's children and grandchildren were apparently unaware of how bad their parents' mental health had become. The search intensified as authorities employed dozens of deputies, carefully combed obscure backroads and brush areas, posted flyers, and questioned many civilians over a large area. Helicopters were even later used in the search, and the search area grew to 1,000 miles from Salado, Texas. By then, one of the Howards' grandsons had offered a reward of $1,000 for his grandparents' safe return. Tips came flooding in after the CBS morning show, but none led to the Howards' discovery. The next day, on Thursday, July 10th, one of the Howards' grandchildren remarked in a newspaper article, "The hardest part is thinking that they are suffering or need us, and we can't get to them." Another bleakly stated, "I just don't think we're going to find them alive now." Unfortunately, everyone's worst fears were finally realized on Saturday, July 12th, when the bodies of Leila and Raymond Howard were discovered in their car by hikers at the bottom of a 20-foot cliff, just outside Hot Springs, Arkansas. Raymond was still in the passenger seat, but Leila was about 20 feet away in a ravine, still clutching her purse and car keys, apparently after the car went over the cliff. She put her car in park, turned off her headlights, opened the passenger side door for her deceased husband, and crawled away to dive her injuries sustained in the crash. There were no skid marks found at the top of the cliff, indicating that Leila's car had driven straight off the edge. A crash scene investigator estimated that the car had been going around 50 miles per hour on the stretch of road leading up to the cliff. Leila likely didn't see the cliff edge, or in some other way distracted, or even became momentarily confused and lost the ability to safely drive. It is not known for how long the Howards' bodies remained undiscovered. Sadly, The crash site where Leela and Raymond's bodies were found was within a zone previously searched by the authorities, but searchers could not see the bottom of the cliff due to excess brush in their line of sight. Leela and Raymond were later buried next to their respective first spouses. Austin, Texas songwriter Tony Scolzo read the July 2nd newspaper article in the Austin American-Statesman in the midst of the search for Leela and Raymond, and he became inspired. He wrote a song with his alternative rock band Fastball, based on Leela and Raymond's disappearance. It was titled The Way. About the song, Scolzo said it's a romanticized take on what happened. Scolzo pictured them taking off to have fun, like they did when they first met. Scolzo wrote the song before the Howards' bodies were discovered. The album, containing The Way, All the Pain Money Can Buy, was released in 1998, 1 year after the Howards' bodies were found. Despite The Way's cheerful, optimistic sound, its lyrics are haunting. They made up their minds and they started packing. They left before the sun came up that day, an exit to eternal summer slacking. But where were they going, without ever knowing the way? They drank up the wine and they got to talking, and now had more important things to say. And when the car broke down, they started walking. Where were they going, without ever knowing the way? Anyone can see the road that they walked on is paved in gold, and it's always summer. They'll never get cold. They'll never get hungry. They'll never get old and gray. You can see their shadows wandering off somewhere. They won't make it home, but they really don't care. They wandered the highway. They're happier there today. Today. Their children woke up and they couldn't find them. They left before the sun came up that day. They just drove off and left it all behind them. But where were they going, without ever knowing the way? My thoughts again returned to Leela and Raymond Howard, barreling off that cliff in Arkansas. Unfortunately, I never seem to get any answers for my questions. I suppose that I can only guess. Maybe Leela had seen the cliff edge, but didn't have enough time to react. I wonder if she even had the mental faculties to function anymore. It leaves me thinking, what was going through their heads as their car plunged off the cliff edge? Fear? Confusion? I'd like to think otherwise. Perhaps in that moment, it wasn't 1997 anymore. Maybe it was a much earlier time for them. Maybe their damaged psyches spared them from that sad reality. Perhaps in that moment, for Leela and Raymond, there were no more medications, no more hearing aids, and no more doctor's appointments. No aching joints, no glasses, no operations, no pacemakers, no forgetting, and no more confusion. Maybe in that moment, and for their entire trip, Leela and Raymond saw themselves as a newlywed couple, their young skin perpetually gleaming in the summer sun, Leela in her best white wedding dress, and Raymond in his finest black tuxedo. Maybe they envisioned a just married sign hanging on the back of their rear window, and empty soup cans tied to their rear bumper. I wonder if they held hands. Maybe when Leela and Raymond Howard drove off that cliff in Arkansas in 1997, they weren't scared. Maybe they were smiling. I found that last one hard to read. I am a bit sentimental. Anyway, I am ready for the palate cleanser. Like all conspiracy theories, depending on your own belief, this next one can be quite humorous or terrifying. Before reading, I'd like to say that everything I wrote is based on impartial information. All words here make a true nonfiction text. Believe it if you want it or not, but you can't deny things that just are there. Some of you might have heard of the Illuminati. It's a conspiracy theory. The Illuminists want to reduce the world population. Only Illuminists will survive to create a new world. That's why it's also called the New World Order. The reductions will start in 2012, as the Mayans said. But before 2012, more and more things are becoming visible of the well-kept secret. So does Denver Airport, also called the New World Airport, show us evidence for the existence of the Illuminati? Somewhere in the 90s, Denver decided to build a new airport, even though Denver already had a well-functioning airport, and the new one wouldn't be a technical improvement. It had to be built. So they started on building the airport, but when it was almost finished, there were problems. They buried one building and started building on top of it. Burying a building isn't a common way of getting rid of the building that's not wanted. Usually, they just destroy unwanted buildings. When the building was finished, people started noticing strange things. To start off with the runway, looking at it from above shows that it looks like the Nazi swastika. In the Second World War, the Illuminati tried to reduce the world population, but they failed. The second strange thing is the AU-AG sign. On the ground, you can find a minecart with the words AU-AG engraved in the ground. If you like chemistry, it may sound familiar. For the ones who are not familiar with the chemical names, AU-AG stands for gold and silver, but AU-AG can also represent a toxic gas. The gas is extremely toxic and can easily kill people. There also is a time capsule in the airport. On the capsule, the Freemasons can be found. The Freemasons are almost the same as the Illuminati. They both want population reductions and for a new world to be built afterwards. And yet another thing that can't be a coincidence: the murals. There are 4 enormous murals designed by Leo Tanguma in the airport. The first mural shows 3 dead women, an African woman, an Indian woman, and a Jewish woman. Those 3 nations are the most hated ones by the Illuminati. You can also find a destroyed city in the background and a Mayan girl. The girl's mural could refer to the Mayan predictions about 2012. The second mural shows a soldier-like figure with a sword. The sword is stabbing a white pigeon, which is the symbol for peace. You also see dead children and crying women. There also is a gas coming from the soldier, which can refer to the AU-AG. The minecart is in front of this mural. At the third mural, you can see all the children from the New World. They are giving their weapons to a German boy who is making something else out of it. There's no need for weapons in the New World. Everyone lives in peace. The last mural shows the New World. The animals and the people are living in perfect harmony. You can also see a Messiah-like figure who is holding a plant, which is a symbol for new life. After all the murder taking place on the first 2 murals, the world is in harmony. The murals is exactly what the Illuminati wants. Remember that first building? And the second one was built on top of it? The buried part of the airport is still used. Not for public. No one knows what's going on in there. There are people working in the buried parts, but if you ask them what they do, they refuse to give an answer. Another strange thing about the buried parts is that there is a sprinkler system in the building, which isn't of any possible use, at least you'd say, but it can be used, like the Nazis did, for toxic gas. Australia antigen, for example? So the airport can be used as a death camp in 2012 to reduce the world population. And another noticeable thing is that a lot of famous people, considered to be luminous, bought houses near Denver Airport as soon as it was released that the airport would come. All these strange things can't be coincidence, can it? I don't know about you, but I do enjoy when I miss an apocalypse. Unless the Mayans meant 2020 instead of 2012. Oh well. Either way, if you like these stories, please like and subscribe, and I will keep them coming. I am incorrigible that way.